So in the last lectures, we restructured our project to have different pages. Now I no longer want to render posts all the time. I want to load this dynamically depending on the path we have in the URL. And for /nothing, so for essentially localhost 3000/ in our case here, or whatever our domain then in the end is, I want to load the posts component. Now we already turned on routing in the app.js file by wrapping everything with the browser router. Now in the blog component where I want to load my different pages, I need to import something else from the router package. So from React Router DOM again, because it is related to rendering, from there I want to load the route object, the route component to be precise. Now we used it like any other component in our JSX code, and it's a self-closing component. Route needs some configuration though. Route needs a path property, and all these props here I'm setting up are of course reserved words kind of. They are expected to be named like this by this component, so you can't change the name. And path simply is a string. Here you define the path for which this route should become active. Something like path/. Then you need to define what should happen when this is the active path. So when React Router finds out that this is the active path. Now in its simplest form, you can now add a render prop, which actually holds a reference to a function, and you can pass an anonymous function, an arrow function here. So here, this function then has to return JSX, which should be rendered. So you could simply render something like a h1 tag where you say home. And of course, you can also render structured JSX here by wrapping it in parentheses and writing multiline, just like you write JSX anywhere else. If you save that code and go back to your application, you actually see home here. You also see that though if you visit new post. The reason for this is that React Router, to determine which path you're on, sees if your current path starts with this path. So if this is a prefix, you can override this behavior by adding one more prop, which is exact. That's a Boolean prop, so just adding it like this sets it as true. The default, when it's not added, is false. Now with exact, for new post, you no longer see home. You only see it for the home page, where indeed the full path is /. So that already is an important takeaway. You use the path here to tell React Router, does my path start with this? Except for the case that you define exact, then the question would be, is my complete path like this? And then here render determines what the React Router should render to the screen in this component's place here. So route simply replaces itself, you could say, with the content you define here. And you can of course use multiple routes, even for the same path. So here I simply duplicated it and rendered something different. And now if I save this, we render both home and home2 beneath each other. So you can use route anywhere where you want beneath each other. You could also nest the second route into a div. You can use as many routes on the same page as you want. React Router will for each of them check if this criteria here is met. So if this criterion here is met, if path is the current path, or if you don't specify exact, if it is the prefix of the current path, and then render this content. This is the core functionality of the router thus far. And here, for example, where I removed exact on the second route, if we save this, we still see both, but if I go to new post, there we only see home2. Because the first home element has exact, and therefore the full path has exact, and therefore the full path is evaluated, which of course is new post now. The second route, however, doesn't use exact, so the path only needs to start with /, and every path starts with /. So this will then always be rendered. So this is the core functionality of the router. Of course, we don't want to render JSX in our case, though that might, of course, be what you want to do in some cases. We want to load one of our components, the post component for just path. So let's make sure we load this component in the next lecture.